Hello everyone, Matt here with thevirtualinstructor.com, and in this lesson we're going to take a look at creating the illusion of waves in a painting using acrylic paints on gessoed panel. So without further ado, let's have a look at the lesson. For this painting, we're going to be working on gessoed panel. Now this panel has somewhat of a texture associated with it. It's going to allow us to create smooth transitions of tone and value, but it's also going to give us a level of control. We're going to start here with an H graphite pencil and just basically lightly plan out the predominant waves that exist in the image, and of course the horizon line as well. Once we have this information in place, we'll go ahead and start planning our initial palette. We'll use a bit of cerulean blue, a bit of ultramarine, Prussian blue, titanium white, and a bit of Payne's gray. We're going to go ahead and start with the sky in the distant background and go ahead and apply a solid application of color here. We'll use a mixture here that's mainly made up of cerulean blue, but we also have a touch of Prussian blue, a bit of Payne's gray, and of course a healthy amount of titanium white in the mixture as well. Once we've got our initial application in place, we can go back over and neutralize it just a bit, making it a bit more gray with a bit more of the Payne's gray in the mixture. Once we've allowed our applications in the sky to dry completely, we can use a bit of painter's tape and tape off the horizon line. This will create a nice sharp edge between the sky and the start of the water. For the distant water, we're going to use mostly Prussian blue with a bit of Payne's gray in the mixture to darken it up a little bit. And we'll just bring that application down to the first line of waves that we drew. Now we're going to have a transition zone that starts to happen here. So we're going to use a little bit of Viridian, which is a green, and start mixing that with cerulean blue and a bit of the Prussian blue. And you can see here, if we work quickly, we can create somewhat of a transition between our next section of waves here, where the values are a little bit lighter, and we also see a bit of that green showing through. Now we'll mix up a lighter version of our blue-green, and here again we're just going to use the Viridian, a bit of the cerulean blue, there's a touch of Prussian blue here as well, and then a healthy amount of titanium white, and we'll just continue working our way down to the next section of waves where we have quite a bit of lighter values in this section. And at this point in the process, of course, we're just establishing locations and shapes of color. It's important to be patient and understand that we're going to be making lots of layered applications to build up the detail in this particular painting. And it's important to kind of work slowly and look at the overall shapes of color initially, and then we'll focus on the details later in the process. I think too many beginning painters see all these details in a subject, especially like this, where we have all the details in the waves, and they get overwhelmed and they think it's going to be very difficult to accomplish a painting like this. But we just have to start simply first, and as we get more information, more colors and values on the surface, then we can start to focus on some of those details. So you can see here as we continue to work our way down the picture plane, we're allowing some variety to happen in our mixture. So in some areas we have a little bit more of the Viridian green dominating the mixture, and in some areas we have a little bit more of the Prussian blue dominating the mixture. And of course this is going to encourage a more representational or realistic image, because we are naturally going to see these variations of color and value in the natural world. Now, while we're discussing variations of color, it might be a good idea to kind of review the colors that we're using for this painting. Here's a look at all the colors that we're using, minus titanium white. Of course, we've already used cerulean blue, ultramarine, Prussian blue, and the Viridian hue, as well as Payne's gray in the development of the sky and the waves as we continue to work our way down. For the majority of the waves in the water in the scene, we're using a mixture of cerulean blue hue, Prussian blue, Viridian hue, and Payne's gray. Of course, that's going to change a little bit. We're going to use a little bit of a different mixture when we get a little bit deeper in the painting to create a brighter teal or a brighter turquoise color. We can adjust the values of the colors that we mix by adding either more Payne's gray to make the value darker or more titanium white to make the value lighter to create the impression of form. Here in the extreme foreground, we've got a section where the value is much darker, so we use a little bit more Payne's gray in the mixture and a bit more Prussian blue. Then once this application has been made, we can remove the painter's tape, revealing a sharp horizon line. Then we can start working on some of the details. We're going to start, of course, in the distance, closer to the horizon line, And we're going to start by adding some darker values. So we'll use the Prussian blue with a bit of the Payne's gray to start making some darker impressions of waves. And then we'll begin going back and start creating some of the lighter values. And it's all about the relationship of the lighter and darker values, which will help create the illusion of waves. Of course, directional stroking is important as well. The direction that we pull our paintbrush will help to indicate the length and size of the waves that we create. So of course these strokes are going to be shorter in the distance because the waves are further away. Here's a closer look at how our directional strokes will eventually affect the illusion of space and the size of the waves in the distance. You can see here for the waves in the distance, the ones that we're working on at this point, we need to make directional strokes that are mostly horizontal. Since the waves are further back in the distance, there's going to be less distance between each one of these sections of lighter and darker value that we add. Now, of course, we'll need to go back and start adding a bit of indications of where we have some waves that are breaking off in the distance. So we'll use a bit of titanium white here with just enough water to make the paint viscous enough for us to make applications with relative ease. And I'm using a very small round brush for these applications. So we'll bring a few of these indications down closer to the middle ground. Again, we're taking this painting a section at a time, working from the background, the area that's the furthest away from the viewer, to the foreground, the area that's closest to the viewer. So as we start working into the middle ground, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to start adding some of the darker values and, of course, some of the lighter values once we've got the darker values in place. This will help create the impression that each one of our waves has a bit of form associated with it. Now here in the middle ground, since the waves are a bit closer to the viewer than the waves we've just addressed, the marks that we make and the shapes of darker and lighter value are going to be a little bit larger, and we're going to see a little bit more of a dynamic shape associated with them. So they're not going to be as flat. They're going to be a little bit more noticeably triangular in their shape. And of course, our directional stroking is going to be important here as well. We also want to make our strokes flow with the direction that the waves are flowing. And we'll just progressively build up lighter and darker values until we start to create the illusion of the waves. And again, this is going to take a bit of patience and understanding that it does take many layered applications to create this illusion. We'll progressively push our value range in this section as well. So we'll get a little bit lighter and a little bit darker if needed to make our shadows a little bit stronger and make our highlights a little bit stronger. This doesn't mean that we need to cover up the middle values that we create. It's all dependent on creating a full range of value. That means we need to have the darkest darks, the lightest lights, and a range of values in between. So we shouldn't just focus on having light and dark, but we should also have those middle values and middle tones in there as well. Now here you can see we're starting to develop some of the spray, the ocean spray that's happening on the top of this particular wave. And we start with just a lighter version of the color that we used for the waves there. That's mixed by the cerulean blue, of course, the viridian hue, titanium white, and just a touch of Prussian blue in the mixture. And then over the top we can get progressively lighter with the applications. As you can see here, I'm putting a heavy application of titanium white. Now there is just a touch of cadmium yellow mixed in as well to make this color feel a bit warmer, make it contrast with the cooler bits of water, and also create the impression of some warmer sunlight that is hitting the top of these waves. Then we can go back and create a little bit of shadow underneath there as well. So I'm using a watered down mixture of the color that we used for the waves initially in this section, just to create some indications of some shadow, because of course, even though we have this ocean spray, it is still a form. And then again, we can go back and create some of those highlights and make them a little bit stronger as well. Now, since we're working our way from the background to the foreground, we're going to see additional contrast as we work our way forward. So in many cases, you'll find that you need to go back and increase the contrast by making some of the values darker and some of the values lighter. And you can see here, we're going back and we're adding some darker values, even though we've added a lot of lighter values already. And that's just increasing the contrast and making this section of the painting appear as though it's closer to the viewer than the distant waves. And of course, we can also push the lighter values as well in the same way. Now we've made our way down to the really exciting part of the painting. So far, we've just basically been setting everything up for what eventually will be mainly the area of focus in the painting. That's that wave that comes right across the middle or just slightly below the middle of the composition. So we'll start here using a bit of our mixture that we've used throughout the process, using the colors of cerulean blue, viridian hue, a bit of Prussian blue, and we'll start establishing some of the darker values. But of course, our directional stroking is going to be important here as well. And there's a couple of areas to think about as we're adding these areas of darker value that are really going to be important for creating the impression of the movement of the water. We're seeing a little bit more of the movement of the water in this section. And again, it's going to be very important to consider the directional stroking. So let's take a closer look at that. So as we build up the relationships of darker and lighter values in this section, with each color that we add, with each value that we add, we need to think about the directional strokes that we're making with the paintbrush. And these directional strokes should flow with the movement of the water. And you can see that there's some subtle changes happening here, but there's also some more drastic changes that are happening as well. So we want to think about our directional strokes as we're applying the color. Now we also want to think about the fact that the wave kind of comes over and folds over the top of itself. So at the very top of the wave, we're going to have directional strokes that indicate this as well. And the combination of directional stroking that flows along the movement of the wave as well as the top of the wave is going to help create that illusion that we need in the painting that will help this translate as a wave instead of just a collection of colors and values. So we'll continue working on the underside of the wave, again just working away from the left side of the picture plane to the right side, adding darker and lighter values. And at this point, we're just concentrating on the shapes of colors and values that we see instead of the details. We're going to let those details gradually emerge from the painting as we make additional layered applications. Now at this point, we're ready to introduce a different type of turquoise. Up to this point, we've used cerulean blue, Prussian blue, viridian hue, and Payne's gray to create our turquoise color, and of course titanium white as well. Now we're going to add a different combination of colors. We're going to use phthalo blue and phthalo green, which is going to produce a brighter turquoise color, which will help this middle section stand out a little bit more. We're going to be using this primarily in the middle ground and bits of the foreground to make that brilliant turquoise color that's going to be important for creating a bit of pop and a bit of focus on this wave. So once we've mixed up this brighter turquoise, we start to apply it, we can see how it's different from the turquoise and teal colors that we already have in place. And this will really make it feel like there's light coming in from behind the wave. And at this point, we haven't really talked about the light source, but for this particular painting, the light source is originating from above and actually behind the wave. So this is producing areas of light coming through the wave. This means that many of our highlights are going to exist on the top of the water. So you're going to see some sections where we see very clear highlights and shadows, and areas where it's a little bit unclear, and that's because light is coming through behind the wave and through the wave. And this can be a difficult illusion to create, but with that brighter teal color, we should be able to accomplish this just fine. Now, just as we've done throughout the painting, we're going to continue to work the dark and light values back and forth. And this is sometimes referred to in painting as pushing and pulling. And basically what we're doing is we're just putting down bits of color that's a bit darker in areas and bits of color that's a bit lighter in areas. And we're just going to keep working back and forth between those lighter and darker values until we arrive at the color and value that's appropriate for that particular section. So again, this is going to require a bit of patience, and you also need to make sure that you don't put too much pressure on yourself to be perfect with every application that you apply. Remember, we're working with acrylics here, so you can make changes very easily, and just be patient with your applications. Of course, the inclusion of the sea foam is very important in creating this illusion. And as we start establishing some of those darker and lighter values, those impressions of shadow and bits of light showing through the wave, we'll begin the process of adding some of the impressions of the sea foam. And initially, our applications are a little bit light, and we'll layer over the top of them with lighter applications, meaning lighter in value, with heavier applications of the white as we progress through the painting. But for now, let's go ahead and start addressing some of the sea spray that happens at the top of this particular wave. So again, we'll start with a lighter application here first, and then we'll add thicker, heavier applications over the top, which will make the value quite a bit lighter and help to create the illusion of movement. So we'll pull these strokes upward and we'll allow our brush to kind of change directions as we touch the surface with the heavier applications to kind of create that illusion of the sea spray and the foam flying in different directions here. Initially, this is just created with titanium white with some of our blue mixture still in the brush. Now remember, since we're working with acrylics, we can change the translucency of the paint applications, of course, by using a little bit more water in the mixture. This is going to allow us to use titanium white, go over the top of the blue applications already in place, and allow some of that blue to show through, which will produce a lighter application of the color. It's somewhat like glazing. And then we can use a little less water in the mixture to create a stronger application. So we'll keep this in mind as we continue to develop the sea foam and, of course, the sea spray at the top of the waves. This means that we don't actually have to mix every color that we use. We can use some of the colors that we've already applied in place and allow some of that color to show through our applications over the top. We can see this very clearly as we start to add some of this brighter turquoise over the top. Some of the blues that we already have in place show through, making this transition and making this color feel a little bit more natural for this particular section. Of course, the approach we're taking here is referred to as direct painting, since we're painting the colors and values as we actually see them. We do have a bit of glazing that's happening here just by thinning out some of the paint. And this approach is just one approach to creating an acrylic painting. It doesn't matter what subject matter you're working on. Some folks are going to feel more comfortable working in totality, meaning that they're going to be addressing the entire portion of the painting or the entire painting surface at one time. And for me, it depends. It depends on the subject, and I kind of like to have little wins as I go along. So I like to do a section at a time when I'm doing a painting that has a lot of detail like this particular subject does. You'll also notice here that I'm bouncing back and forth between developing some of the sea foam and going back to the wave that's just behind it. And that kind of helps me make sure that I'm creating some consistency in the painting and creating a bit of harmony and unity as we go as well. Now, as I mentioned before, we need to think about the directional stroking. So at the top of the wave here, we can see that we're pulling some of the strokes downward as the wave curls around over the top of itself. And then just as we have with the left portion of the wave, we'll start establishing some of the sea spray at the top with a lighter application, and then progressively we'll get a bit heavier with the paint, meaning less water in the mixture, which will produce a more intense application of the titanium white. And of course, as our applications get a bit thicker with less water, we'll also consider the directional strokes that we make here to make the sea spray feel like it's flying off in different directions according to the breaking wave. For the most part, to create this impression, we're going to start right at the edge where the splatters of the water are the strongest, and then pull the brush strokes upwards so they feel like they're moving away from the viewer as the wave is coming towards us. That sea spray is falling back off the top of the wave. And then we can also go back in and create some impression of shadow here and there to give the sea spray a bit of feeling of form. We don't want the sea spray to feel flat. We want it to feel like it has form as well. So that's, of course, created by the relationship of the lighter and darker values. So we need a bit of shadow in there as well. Now, just as we did on the first wave, where we added a bit of cadmium yellow to the mixture, we'll do the same here. And you can see this slightly warmer white really stands out a bit more against the cooler colors around it. So just a touch of cadmium yellow in the mixture is going to create the impression that there's some sunlight hitting this sea spray, and it makes it stand out and creates additional contrast beyond just the use of titanium white. We'll continue to add a few more indications of the spray and a few dots here and there in the wave or the area of darker blue behind it. Now we'll continue working our way down, and this, frankly, is the most exciting part of the painting for me, and that's creating the impression of the sea foam as it flows over the top of each one of the waves. And you can see here we're starting with a lighter blue on the left side and a lighter green on the right side. And we'll progressively make this a bit stronger as we go, or a bit more intense. But first we'll just establish the patterns that are happening down here. And of course we don't have to be tied to our reference for this. We just want to be more in tune with the marks that we have on our painting surface. So we understand that the wave kind of dips down in the middle and goes up on each one of the sides. So the sea foam that we create here needs to reflect this. So we're going to use mostly horizontal strokes. We're going to allow some variation in these strokes here. I'm using a small flat brush initially to create this, and then over the top we'll use a smaller round brush to get some of the details in between. We can also vary the intensity of the application as well, because this is what we'll see in reality. We'll see some areas where the sea foam is really, really bright and light, and some other areas where it's a little bit subdued and the color is not quite as strong and intense. We'll especially see more intense and stronger areas of the white sea foam in areas where light is hitting it. And of course, these areas are going to exist mainly outside of the curve of the wave. So closer to where we have that dip in the middle, and on either side, we're going to have some lighter values. So here you can see I'm adding a little bit of a lighter value that's kind of making its way from the shadow to the area of light. You'll notice that as I intensify the area where this portion is in the light and make it a bit brighter and stronger, the area that's in shadow will appear a little bit darker and create that impression that there is some shadow underneath the wave. Once we've got our initial applications in place that are still relatively light, we can go in now, as I mentioned before, with the more precise round brush. With this smaller round brush, we can make some connections between the larger shapes that we created with the flat brush. We also can make some broken lines here and there, and just some impressions that the sea foam is breaking up in areas. Now, of course, the sea foam itself is three-dimensional as well, so we're going to go back in with our titanium white with a bit of cadmium yellow in the mixture, just as we did on the sea spray on the top of the waves, and go right over the top of some of the areas of the sea foam. This will help to create the illusion that the sea foam is actually three-dimensional and it's actually floating on top of the water. We're not going to make this application everywhere. We're just going to make it mainly in the areas where the light is the strongest. And we can see just with this bit of cadmium yellow mixed with the titanium white, it's making a huge difference in creating that illusion that the sea foam is three-dimensional here. Now over the top of our dark blue area in the foreground, we have quite a bit of sea foam. So we'll go ahead and use the larger flat brush and use titanium white with just a touch of Prussian blue in the mixture. So it harmonizes with the color that we already have in place. And we'll go ahead and start pulling strokes horizontally across the form or the flow of this particular wave, mostly diagonal. I shouldn't say horizontal, it's mostly diagonal with the shape of this wave. And just start establishing the shapes of the sea foam. Then we can go back and get progressively lighter with the value. This means that there's a little bit less water in the brush, and we're applying the paint with a thicker application to create these areas of highlight that exist right on the top of these collections of sea foam. And again, we're going to see the three-dimensional qualities of the sea foam a little bit clearer in this section because, of course, it is closer to the viewer. Once we've established the larger sections, we can go in with a smaller brush and establish some of the smaller bits of sea foam that are happening closer to the middle of this section. We'll also establish some of the spray that's happening here. Now I'm going to tone down the amount of spray that I actually see in the reference that I'm working from. I don't want it to distract from the middle wave, which is really where I want the viewer's eye to go to. So I don't want to steal too much focus from the middle wave. We are going to apply some of the sea foam here, or sea spray here, and we're going to allow the sea spray to kind of help direct the viewer's eye to the middle wave. So we'll allow most of the sea spray to flow in a diagonal towards the middle portion of our middle wave, and that will help guide or direct the viewer's eye to that location. And of course, we need to apply that lighter, slightly tinted yellow application of color to the sea foam here in the foreground. This is really going to bring out the three-dimensional qualities of the sea spray and the sea foam in this section. Again, this is titanium white with just a touch of cadmium yellow to warm it up and create additional contrast. And speaking of contrast, I'm going to add just a bit more Prussian blue with a touch of Payne's gray here to make the back side of this wave a little bit darker to increase the contrast here and make the sea spray stand out a little bit more. And now our acrylic painting of waves is complete. If you enjoyed this video, then I know that you'll enjoy being a member at thevirtualinstructor.com. Our comprehensive membership program includes video courses on drawing and painting, weekly live lessons, ebooks, lesson plans for teachers, weekly critiques, and much, much more. To learn more about our program, just visit thevirtualinstructor.com/members or click on the card in the upper right-hand corner. And if you want to check out 3 of our course modules for free, you can do so. Just click on the link on your screen now. And if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe to the channel. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.